Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We have reached, as you know, the Season 3 finale, Through the Looking Glass. This is our last episode of the season.
We are going to play a little bit more from our interview with Nestor Carbonell to wrap the season. He, of course, played Richard Alpert.
And we are going to end by doing our MVPs and LVPs of the season. This has become sort of a tradition here on The Hatch.
Can't believe we're already through 3 seasons. Let's get right into it.
As always on The Hatch, we start with our hot takes about the week's episode. Through the Looking Glass, I feel like we've said this the last couple of weeks, but definitely an episode where we could just hot take for the next hour and a half. Yeah, what do you got?
A lot to love in this episode, but I've got to share a bit of something I didn't love. Are you kidding me? Walt comes back now. Like, Walt is the Deus Ex Machina that gets John Locke out of the pit of bones. Like,
you're kidding me. That's awesome. I disagree.
I love it if it went anywhere. Just because we know that it isn't a plot that really gets borne out, I was just like, oh, man, I don't know about that. And then at the end, when Sawyer kills Tom Friendly, he says,
"That's for taking the kid off the raft."
Which seems to, again, build up this idea that, Walt's coming back into the picture here. And
I just thought that was such a phenomenal throwback to the season 1 finale.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality, Malcolm David Kelly was growing up.
Right.
And he wasn't going to be able to portray this character anymore in a situation where time was moving at, like a couple of weeks a season max on the island. And I kind of think that they put him there because they realized that this was their last chance to, do anything with him before it became, way too awkward to figure out.
That's fair.
I mean, even with this, Sawyer's gonna joke next season and refer to him as taller Ghost Walt after Locke describes him as like Walt but taller.
And I mean,
I don't know.
Walt telling John to get up is absolutely a great moment and a shocking one and an exciting one. It's just I forgot that happened and that there were sort of 2 very obvious Walt references here at the end of season 3, and oh well, the road not taken.
One other thing to note about the scene where Sawyer shoots Tom Friendly and says that's for taking the kid off the raft. If you haven't heard it, go back and listen to this is for our listeners. Go back and listen to our interview in season 1 with the actor MC Gainey, who plays Tom Friendly. He told us that he was playing Tom as being in love with Sawyer, and that's what he was thinking about in that moment when Sawyer shot him.
That's right.
Which just totally makes that scene even more dramatic and kind of wild to see.
Good reminder.
Anyway.
What's your hot take?
That was from the end of season 1 where we talked to MC. My hot take. So I guess I just want to pick up on a little bit of a hobby horse from the last couple of weeks and just dig into Ben a little while longer here for just continuing to lie to everyone all the time.
Deeply, yes.
I mean, he's lying throughout this episode, but the one that I thought was the most galling, and I think it was galling to me because I had to think about it to really realize it, is when he says to Mikhail, when he's trying to convince Mikhail to carry out his orders and kill Charlie and kill Bonnie and Greta, he says,
"You have to understand, everything I did for the island."
The island told you it was necessary for you to jam your own people.
Yes, it did. You've always been a loyalist, Mikhail. Now I'm asking you to trust me. To trust Jacob, who told me to do this.
Which is this sort of iconic, at least to me, this iconic Ben line, where he's putting it all out on the line and, desperately, stating his need to, do desperate things to help the island. But, but on this watch, the way we've been talking about Ben and digging into his lies and his real motivations, we know it's not true. Everything he did for them. No, everything he did for himself. The island is his excuse. And what he's trying to do here is prevent Charles Widmore, again, from coming to the island to take his power away from him.
Right. Nothing's going to happen to the island.
No, the island's fine. It's an island. I mean, it's a magical island with special powers, but the island, you're right, the island can take care of itself.
Right. It has survived Charles Widmore. It's survived it survived many, many different sort of little civilizations. It's going to be fine.
Right.
Yeah.
They come, they fight, they destroy, they corrupt. It always ends the same. But the island is fine.
Yeah. Depending on what you mean by fine. If it's the site of much bloodshed, not the greatest, but
fine.
Yeah. I was really troubled by that, too, especially because he's using it to talk Mikhail into killing his comrades and his compatriots, I mean, Ben is not just trying to get people to continue following him here. He's trying to get them to take really extreme action on his personal behalf, right? Not the island's behalf. And that's just an extra level of cruelty and darkness, I think.
Absolutely. And it works on Mikhail, and he tries to make it work on Jack, of course, at the end. And thank goodness it doesn't work on Jack. Who calls him out on it. And Jack, and this gets into the meat of the episode, so maybe we should get to this later, but we definitely ought to talk about Jack's decision to let Ben go ahead and supposedly kill Jin and Saeed and Bernard to get everyone else rescued, which is an interesting conversation about Jack's leadership. But before we get to that, we have a hot take from a listener that we should play.
Guys, I just listened to the Brig episode in which Nestor Carbonell says that there is a theme for each season. I haven't thought this through entirely, but I really feel the theme of season 3 would be they come, they fight, they destroy, they corrupt. It's the season where we see most the conflict between the Losties and the others culminating in the battle on the beach at the end. And also in the flashbacks we see the others basically purging Dharma. And it's this theme to me that is basically humanity keeps destroying itself and creating conflict. And that's what the island is a microcosm of, and that's kind of the overall arching experiment that Jacob and the Men in Black have been sort of debating about for millennia.
So Neville here gets to that point that you just brought up. We've talked about this a number of times so far, and we have seen this sort of clash of civilizations that started this season and ended it, indeed. I mean, this is the season where the beach campers are at war with the others. And we know now that was sort of one war in a long series of wars in which sort of the winner briefly gets to dominate the island until someone else arrives.
Right, and most recently before this, we now know it's the Dharma versus the others, and the others won that war with the Purge. I think what Through the Looking Glass does, and this probably has to do with the mechanics of how the show was made and the fact that they finally got an end date during season 3, but this episode really, everything that plays out from here on stems directly, I would argue, from what happens right here. And it's phenomenal. I mean, it's an episode that calls back to lots of great earlier moments, like we talked about with taking the kid off the raft, and there's a great reference to Ben's line in the season 2 finale that we're the good guys. That comes up here. We get the setup for what comes next. We get the incredible drama of what happens on the beach camp with Jin and Saeed and Bernard. It's an episode that's firing on all cylinders all the time. I mean, we get Rousseau moments. We get the beginning
Rousseau
of
and
the Sawyer-Juliet partnership even. Yeah. It's like, I'm sorry, just everything is happening in this episode.
We get Jack telling Kate that he loves her.
We do.
That's a critical
what did you think of that?
Moment of resolution. Anyway, we're okay.
What did you think
full
of that?
bore now. Yeah, okay. Gosh. I mean, it's a weird moment because it comes so soon after Jack and Juliet kiss. So you see Jack and Juliet kiss, and you're like, oh, okay, good. That's happening. That makes sense. And then a couple of scenes later, Jack, I think rightly points out that the reason Sawyer uninvited you is that he's scared for you and he wants to protect you. It's the same reason I told you not to come back for me, and I did that because I love you. And the subtext there is that Sawyer also loves you.
Right.
And I don't know. I actually thought it was about the best that could have been. Feeling sort of the way that I feel about the Jack-Kate relationship. I mean, it wasn't sort of cheesy. It wasn't drawn out. It was just Jack being very brusque and straightforward.
Which is what he does.
Yeah. And I think it was kind of refreshing after a very protracted love triangle this season.
I agree, and I like that it kind of very quickly like puts to rest the Jack and Juliet idea as well. Not that totally goes away. I know that still surfaces a bit next year, but I mean, what I think it's Jack is saying, whether intentionally or not, is that he knows that even though he's got this thing going with Juliet, that it's maybe even helped him clarify that his heart is really with Kate. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that's the obvious implication there. Like, he kisses Juliet, and then he knows, like, no, I really love Kate, and I should tell her that.
Yeah.
It's simple. It gets the job done.
Yeah. No, I appreciated it. And there is no resolution to it. It resolves that storyline in a small way, in the sense that, okay, somebody finally said it, but then they basically don't speak to each other for the rest of the episode.
Which is fine.
Right. I mean, they do, of course, speak to each other for the rest of the episode. They are, Kate washes Jack's hand after he beats up Ben. There is all that other stuff, but they don't talk about this.
Yeah.
So, and of course, we get the absolutely brilliant use of the flash forward.
Of course. To
find out, the moment where you realize that they are in the future is when Kate gets out of her car.
Yep.
And you see, oh shit, these two people, know each other in Los Angeles. They left, Kate makes it clear very early when she says, still pulling people out of burning wreckage, huh?
Yeah, right. That's a great line. That's like, in case you haven't figured out what's going on here,
right.
like
we are in
this is in the
post
future
timeline. So that is a really, really interesting bit of foreshadowing, I think, because we just had this resolution moment in this romantic tension that's been playing out for 3 years. And now it's like, oh, but there's so much more between these two people that we don't know yet.
I think that I was thinking as I watched the flashback, on this rewatch, I was trying to think of like, would it have been reasonable to have, figured out what was going on during this the first time through, not knowing? Mm-hmm. And in some ways, it seems like it should be obvious. Like, the first scene is Jack in an oceanic, airlines flight, and he's got this big beard that we've never seen him with before, and
he's drinking heavily,
and it's like on the one hand, watching it again, you think, oh, of course, like, he says at the end he's been hoping to crash, and when you watch the first scene, you see that in his eyes when there's the turbulence, that there's that little bit of hope. And it's like, oh, like, I recognize that now that I know what's going on here. But I feel like if you don't know that that's what's going on, it's just totally impossible to... maybe some people did. It's brilliantly done.
One of our listeners mentioned this after Stranger in a Strange Land, that one of the... Can't do the season 3 finale without bringing up Stranger in a Strange Land.
Sure.
They mentioned, and I'm so sorry, I cannot remember this person's name, but they mentioned that one of the useful things that episode did was present a really unstable Jack. And so because we saw that kind of much darker side, that made Flash Forward Jack a little bit... It made it easier to believe that could have been something in Jack's past that we just didn't know about yet.
Right, I think that makes sense, because I think the most logical read here, and this is probably what we all thought the first time, although I don't quite remember, was that this is Jack's continuing dissolution, continuing sort of descent into madness after the dissolution of his marriage, right?
Yeah, especially when Sarah comes to visit him in the ER and stuff.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. I was also watching for that, just trying to see if there were any clues, and of course there are clues, but even when, Jack... He brings up his father a couple of times, and nobody ever says Christian's dead, which he brings him up to the other doctor at the hospital, who then kind of walks away from that point, and he brings it up to the pharmacist who, he says like, oh, let's call my father or something.
Right. In retrospect, you watch those and you think, oh, okay, like, Jack is drunk, and he knows his father is dead, but like he says, you get my father down here, and if I'm drunker than he is, you can fire me. Like, that's a very clear reference to Jack thinks his dad is up, in heaven or hell or wherever, like, getting drunk.
Yeah, but it could also mean he's up on an upper floor of this hospital.
Right, which is the obvious interpretation if you don't know.
Right.
The one line that I thought And I remembered the drinking line, but the one line that I had forgotten that I thought was a pretty clear hint that, again, you're not going to get if you don't know, but was that chief of surgery character who says to him, "Dr. Shepard, the hero, twice over."
Oh, you're right.
Twice over.
That really didn't even register with me.
Rescues the woman from the car on the bridge. That's the twice over. So what's the first time? And it's Oceanic 815. But it's quick, and there's no reason you'd really think of that.
Yeah, and when I heard that, I figured he was just referring to some medical procedure.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable.
Yeah, because even before Jack arrived on the island, he had sort of established himself. He saved Sarah. He had this sort of hero complex going on.
Right. He was the guy who did the surgery that couldn't be done.
Yeah. I mean, so the other thing I really felt about this flashback, besides acknowledging that it's brilliantly done, is that it is really, really painful to watch. It's like one of the harder ones I can remember. It reminds me of some of the Charlie flashbacks where he's battling addiction. Like it's upsetting. Nobody really does anything redeeming. You don't, I was glad. I felt gladness in my heart when each of those scenes ended. Because I was like, oh, good, and we know the setup, but it was just like, oh, a next level there of Jack.
Yeah, and I think what's impressive about it is that it's really commitment on the part of the writers.
Yeah,
like they gave us literally a 2-hour flashback. Not 2 hours, but it's a 2-hour episode where the entire flashback through those 2 hours is a series of scenes of Jack just getting darker and darker, and like you said, nothing redeeming. He's popping pills on the job. He's looks like he's going to throw himself off a bridge.
Right.
He's
speeding and listening to loud metal in his car. He's
showing up at a random funeral home and mourning someone who we don't even know who it is, and it's really depressing. And it all exists in serving the purpose of the reveal at the end. Like the whole point of every one of these scenes is to make the reveal at the end all that much greater. And it's a big risk to take, but it's brilliant. I mean, it works so well.
Good. And by the time you get to Jack saying,
We were not supposed to leave.
Yes, we were.
It just lands with this thud because you've just seen, I believe it's John saying you're not supposed to do this.
Yeah, and Ben as well.
Yeah, and it's just this incredible echo of, holy shit, what was it that made Jack turn around like this? I mean, this is 180 degrees.
Well, I think the groundwork is laid in this episode on Island, and credit to Ben. I mean, for all of his lies and deceptions, he really spells it out quite clearly to Jack when he makes the speech where he asks him, why do you want to leave? What are you trying to get back to?
Right.
Because Ben recognizes Jack doesn't have a lot to go back to, and he kind of calls it that this is what's going to happen when Jack leaves the island, that he's going to miss the purpose he had here. I think that's what it is. Yeah,
and sadly, I mean, he's right. And if Jack had, obviously this is not a scenario in which Jack is going to step back and take a moment because everything's happening so quickly, but Jack never gave a moment's thought to the idea that what if we just stayed? I mean, all of his energy has been directed toward eventually leaving, and understandably so. But it doesn't, I mean, at this point even, I think John is the only person who has really thought about staying on the island as an option. Right. And of course he's kind of gone all the way in the other direction, but...
Right, to the point of throwing knives through people's backs to prevent anyone from leaving the island.
That happened.
That did happen. I mean, to Jack's credit, Jack is not just thinking about Jack here. I mean, Jack is thinking about everyone. And that's something that Locke is not doing. Locke is thinking very selfishly and narrowly about himself and his own, purpose and mission and specialness. And Jack is thinking, I need to get all of these people home safe. And Jack has been laser focused on that since day one. And, at times he loses his way, and we've criticized him for that, and rightly so. But he is trying to be a hero here, quite literally. And I mean, he's willing to, and I alluded to this earlier, he's willing to sacrifice Saeed and Bernard and Jin to facilitate getting everyone else home, which I think is a really interesting choice. I don't know that I would criticize it. I don't know that I would praise it, but I think it just shows how determined he is that this is going to be it, and that they're all going to get home, even if they have to lose a couple people.
Yeah, I think it really demonstrates how close Jack feels that they are here. Like, this isn't launching a raft. This isn't a shot in the dark like some of the other stuff has felt. Like, this person showed up on this island somehow. She says there's a freighter offshore. This is as good a shot as they're ever going to get, and Jack knows that. And yeah, I mean, I think he makes some very intense decisions, and of course, fortunately, Sayid and Jin and Bernard are not actually dead.
Yes.
But that, I think, actually shows a type of growth. Kind of a strange and weird type of growth, but I think there's an earlier version of Jack that would not have been willing to do that, and would have entered into this bind of, how can I save everybody here? And at this point, like, they're just so close to the end, and, he feels like they're so close to the answer that it's just like, okay, we're gonna take some losses, basically. And I don't know that we've ever seen Jack say that before.
I agree with you. And I agree that there's growth. I think there's also got to be an element of just, like, Jack being done dealing with Ben after everything they've been through over the last 2 seasons. Like, not just from a frustration perspective, but from a perspective of, like, realizing that making a deal with Ben is never a good idea.
Right. And probably a sense of he might be bluffing, or how do I even know that this is real?
Right. And how do I know that he won't kill them anyway, even if I do hand over this radio?
Right.
I mean, I think for, it's a terrible thing for Jin and Bernard and Sayid potentially, but I actually kind of think it's a good call.
Yeah.
Also heroic, as always, Sayid, who puts it right out there at the beginning of this episode.
Yep.
That he's willing to die for the cause, because Sayid is awesome. What was the line? He says, "I'm willing to give my life if it means securing rescue, but I'm not giving it up for nothing." Mm-hmm. Like, fucking legend, Sayid. Sayid. We should talk about Charlie.
Yes, we should.
We should talk about how Charlie, under threat of torture and interrogation, holds up like a champ.
Yeah, and really thinks on his feet in terms of, he was talking to Desmond, he was just singing, and continues to just needle these people. And maybe it's because he's already resigned himself to, I'm going to die, and he's already...
I think that's what it is.
There's an element of nihilism and, who cares anymore? And these are, these to me are the 2 scariest others we've met thus far. These Bonnie and
Greta.
Like, they're just so military. And they're so, there's one point when Bonnie decides to kill Charlie, and she says, I want it to hurt. And she goes to get this other weapon, and it's like, ugh. Yeah.
Which, by the way, a wonderful bit of foreshadowing by the writers, because she says she wants the spear gun, which is the spear gun that later is used to apparently kill Mikhail.
For the 3rd time that he apparently dies.
For several times.
Yeah, really got to give credit where it's due to Charlie here. However, I was wondering...
Can I give one before you go back? Can I give one more bit of credit to Charlie?
Of course.
Just that he I think the nihilism is part of it, but also he just, like you said, he is thinking on his feet. The moment where when Bonnie has been shot and looks like she's going to die, and they need to get the code out of her. Right. Desmond says there's no point, she's not going to give it to us, and Charlie reads the situation way better than Desmond and says no, like, and goes to Bonnie and tells her, this is your chance to screw over Ben, who just ordered you to be killed. Like, give us the code and we'll fuck up Ben for you.
You're very right.
And that works like a charm.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have gotten that jammer undone otherwise. So anyway, good for Charlie. So now you were going to backtrack. So
well, I was just wondering, like, this is probably not worth questioning, but did Charlie have to die here? Like, what if he had, I guess if he had left that room and closed the door behind him, maybe Mikhail wouldn't have thrown the grenade or whatever. But I remember, I just felt watching that, like, I don't really understand the decision to sort of slam the door. I understand that he was saving Desmond, but I just felt like he could have maybe gotten out, but I don't know.
So I think you're right. I think that the other option would have been run out of that room and he and Desmond jump back down into the moon pool
and just swim
back up to the surface together. I think that Charlie decided to die because he thought it was what needed to happen, because Desmond told him that that was part of the sequence.
Ooh.
I mean, there's...
Yeah.
He clearly, at the end of Greatest Hits, he accepts his own death as, a consequence of what has to happen here. And then he gets down into the station, and the way he deals with Bonnie and Greta, it still seems like he's pretty set that he's going to die. Mm-hmm. And then there's a moment that really struck me where he, goes to put the good vibrations into the, into the jammer to turn the thing off. And after he puts the code in and the thing turns off, he says,
"So much for fate."
Which is this moment where it seems like, now he thinks he's going to get away with this and he's going to live.
Yeah, that's how I felt too.
And I think that the moment he sees Mikhail out there with the grenade and sees him close the window, there's this look goes into his eyes like, oh, now I get it.
So this is it.
And I think to him in that moment, it's the moment of like, okay, no, I was wrong. This really does have to happen. And yes, he could have, potentially swum out, but I do think he makes a conscious choice there of like, oh, this was how it was meant to be.
Which is
sad, but...
Yeah, and sad in a different way than I remembered. I mean, I remembered Charlie sacrificing himself to save Desmond, but I forgot about this decision moment of... I think your read is correct in terms of... I was told this is part of sort of a larger timeline, and I have to fulfill my role in it. And that is to die, so I guess this is... at this point, he's done fighting for his life. And...
Yep.
That's really sad.
One thing I want to point out, we did a poll on Twitter, and if you don't follow us on Twitter, by the way, we're at The Hatch Podcast, asking our followers, what is the more iconic lost moment? Is it Not Penny's Boat or We Have to Go Back? Rosie, what would I don't know if you voted in the poll. What did you vote for?
I did not vote in the poll. I've got to go with We Have to Go Back. Because it almost works as like a meme. Like, I mean, we say it all the time, and people who watch Lost say it all the time, and you immediately recognize it, and you can sort of deploy it in different situations, and it's sort of a thing that comes back over and over again. Whereas Charlie's moment, while incredibly resonant, doesn't have that same recurrence throughout the show.
I agree with that. That is also why I voted for We Have to Go Back. Mm-hmm. We got a couple of responses from listeners that I thought were really valuable. Just to quickly point these out. Twitter follower at @flight_815, aka John Locke, says that We Have to Go Back is definitely more iconic in that it's more well known by casual and non-viewers of the show.
Yeah.
I suspect Not Penny's Boat has more emotional resonance to many diehards, though, and I think that's a really good reading of the situation. We also got one from Stephen Brandon, who we actually had on the podcast earlier this year. He was the creator of Lost, the parody musical. He says, well, you can quote/shout We Have to Go Back easily, and Not Penny's Boat is more of a visual thing that requires more work and a Sharpie, also true. And then Susie Hula points out, they both pack a punch, that's for sure. Not Penny's Boat is the emotional ending of the arc for seasons 1 through 3, and We Have to Go Back is the start of the next.
Ooh.
Which I like a lot as well.
I like that. I think all of those are true.
I do too. Those are some smart responses from our listeners. We Have to Go Back, by the way, won the poll with 58% of the vote to 42% for Not Penny's Boat. So a diversity of opinions, but a majority there for We Have to Go Back. Anyway, what else should we talk about with Through the Looking Glass?
Oh my goodness. So I think Sawyer's quite interesting in this episode. I know his role is pretty small. Have we talked yet about why he's so mad at Kate?
No, I was confused about that.
because when he comes back from the brig, I mean, it's just like, clearly that experience transforms him. And I think, I mean, we had a long conversation about whether killing Anthony Cooper, like, set him free in any type of way. And, you know, when Cooper rips up the letter, it means X, Y, and Z. But, like, Sawyer is very much distancing himself from Kate and has been for the last couple of episodes. And it's never really been clear to me why.
I guess the best explanation is probably that he's just generally unhappy and uneasy, and he's taking that out on Kate because she's closest to him. Yeah. Like, that's probably the, you know, Occam's razor explanation here, rather than there being anything specific that's wrong between them.
Makes enough sense.
I mean, I think we see, based on you know, how Kate characterizes Sawyer's attitude the last, you know, couple weeks in this episode, that killing Anthony Cooper did not have a, you know, a great releasing, clarifying effect on Sawyer. Like, he seems rattled.
Right. Rattled and upset and sort of worse off than he was.
I think a lot of this season, the more I think about it, is about just Ben's leadership and power just unraveling around him. I mean, so much of the plot this season, I mean, pretty much everything that happens this season, you know, in terms of major plot points, at least, you know, until Naomi shows up, it's really driven by Ben. I mean, Ben engineers this kidnapping so that he can have this surgery done to him, and makes a deal with Jack to, you know, where Jack wants to get off the island. And Ben sends Juliet to spy on the pregnant women and then to raid the camp.
They have the submarine ready to go for Jack, and then John blows it up, which sets up the John-Ben conflict.
And yes, and Ben then sets Locke up for failure, or at least tries to, and fails to kill him. It's like, you know, there's just, especially watching, you know, everything fall apart around Ben this week, where he finds out that Juliet betrayed him, and that you know, that a bunch of his people died when he sent them to the beach, and that there's this rescue boat. It's like, this just feels like these final dominoes falling over, where at the beginning of the season, Ben was set up as this, you know, the end of last season, really, in the season 2 finale, Ben is set up as this all-powerful, manipulative, brilliant, you know, schemer who's brilliant and, you know, controls everything. And then we, you know, by the time we get to the Jacob's cabin stuff, and then this week, it's like we're just forced to confront the fact that all of Ben's machinations have just totally collapsed all around him, and and ending with the biggest failure of all, that Charles Widmore, who he kicked off the island to take charge, is now back for him. I mean, you could make an argument, I think, that this is really a season about Ben in a lot of ways.
Interesting. Very interesting.
I just came up with that on the spot, but I think I buy it.
I think I buy it too. It is the connective tissue. And certainly his flashback, kind of like the way the Soul Desmond flashback in season 2 acted, is the one where you really unlock some pivotal stuff.
I agree. I mean, I think it serves a similar purpose, where there's this historical context that's needed to inform the end game. And in season 2, you know, that historical context comes, you know, alongside the end game, and here it comes 2 episodes earlier. But it's no, I think it totally serves that purpose.
Yeah, and that's, you know, you build to that throughout the season, and then finally you get a little bit of that material. Yeah. And it leaves you wanting more. And then we're going to get a whole season of historical context. So some of it, which we were actually present for. I got to say, I know in the finale last year I talked about how maybe Live Together, Die Alone was the best episode of Lost. I was underselling Through the Looking Glass. This is probably a better episode than the season 2 finale. I'm kind of convinced of that after watching it again. I don't know if I agree that it's better. There's more going on, I think. True. But I don't know if I'd say better. They're both very, very good. I do, speaking of Live Together, Die Alone, possibly my favorite line of this episode is when Rose says to Jack,
"No one gets left behind."
If you say live together, die alone to me, Jack, I'm going to punch you in your face.
Which is a real treat, and just a very, very sweet callback.
It is. I loved. There were so many good little lines this episode. Like I had made a note here of when Ben yells at John when he has the gun trained on Jack. He says, "Do it, John! Shoot him!" And Rousseau just like elbows him unconscious immediately.
And when Naomi says to Jack,
What did you do for a living before you became Moses?
and Jack says he was a doctor, and Naomi goes, "That makes sense."
Yeah, Naomi calls it like she sees it.
Yep.
It's great.
Oh dear.
Gosh, we didn't talk about Hurley, who after spends the last 2 weeks with everyone just calling him fat and unhelpful, gets to save the day and tell everyone I saved them. Great moment.
Yeah, one of my favorites. And even in this episode, Sawyer tells him you can't come, and of course, thank goodness he did come, because of course Juliet was lying about the guns, and they get to the beach with absolutely no plan of any kind.
Yeah.
Anyway, you were going to say something.
Oh, just that I also just want to say that we finally get the long-awaited Danielle Rousseau, Alex Rousseau reunion here. And I love that their mother-daughter bond is cemented by tying up Ben together.
Oh, dear.
Danielle meets her daughter, and the first thing she says is, "You want to help me tie him up?"
And Alex does, in fact.
If I were her, I'd want to tie the guy up too.
Yeah, jeez.
Oh, gosh.
Do you have any hindsights?
Lots of hindsights. The first one is that when Ben, at the beginning of this episode, the first time we see him, he's writing in his diary, sort of as his diabolical plan that's going to fail goes into motion all around him. He's journaling. And I kind of smiled because it really reminded me of season 5, when Sawyer lectures Jack about how, yes, he's going to sit down and read his book every night while he thinks about what to do, just like Winston Churchill did during the Blitz. And one, which is a great storyline, but two, I just thought it was interesting. Ben too, sitting and journaling and thinking things through. Ultimately, it does not work out for Ben here, and it comes crashing down. But I admire the commitment to process on Ben's part, that he's not panicking, that he's doing his thing. What's your hindsight?
So I actually thought Hurley's role in this episode really nicely sets him up, actually, for the last 3 seasons as sort of the unexpected hero.
Ooh, okay.
Which, of course, culminates in the conclusion of his story, where up until the very end, you think Jack is going to become the new Jacob. And, similarly in this episode, you think Jack is going to save the day. And then, out of nowhere, seemingly, Hurley shows up and really sort of does the thing. And I don't know. I no way of knowing whether the writers sort of knew that was going to happen, but I feel like that's very true to the role Hurley ultimately plays in this saga.
I like that a lot. The unexpectedness of it.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have expected it.
Yeah. I don't know, because if I recall correctly, it's only at the very, very end that Hurley ends up with the power, right?
Right. It's only in the end of the last episode where Jack has, realized he's going to go sacrifice himself.
Right.
And if you don't mind my sneaking my second hindsight in here.
Of course.
The moment in the flash forward where Jack puts his hand down on Locke's coffin, not knowing it's Locke, I checked and I watched both of these scenes. It's very similar to the scene at the very end of the series finale where Jack puts his hand on his father's coffin in the church. It's not shot exactly the same way, but it's close. And in both of them, there's this big build-up where Jack walks up to this coffin slowly, dramatically, and puts his hand down, and then his hand pauses both times right before it touches the coffin, like he's a little bit afraid to do it, of what's going to happen. And then he puts his hand down and touches the coffin. And here nothing happens. In the finale, he starts to get flashes of his life and of Kate. But I don't know that I can really draw a neat comparison between them or what they represent. But I just think visually, it's interesting that there's such similar moments that are important to Jack.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder, I mean, I assume that was some kind of intentional motif, but good call, good catch.
I would think so. So we have one more piece to close the season here of our interview with Nestor Carbonell. Of course, he plays Richard Alpert. He has some more fun scenes with Ben in the season 3 finale here, and we're gonna finish playing this chat with him.
Let's do it.
What do you think Richard did after he left the island and began to age? I'm sure you've gotten that question before, but you must have put some thought to it.
I have. It's Ian and I. Ian Cusick, plays Desmond. We've joked about it many times. I was like, we should do like a little short where, you and I bump into each other, even though we didn't work. We didn't know each other on Lost, and maybe we share the same therapist. Maybe I'm a handyman. Maybe I work. I work through TaskRabbit. Doing handiwork. I don't know.
I think Ian actually mentioned this to us because this sounds familiar.
Okay, all right. So maybe we will. Maybe we'll do a little short and and find out what Desmond and Richard are doing here off the island.
But really, how does Richard deal with that? He's been ageless. He's been doing this special purpose, and now he's just kind of a guy.
He's just a dude, and I wonder now if, now that he started to age, if he suddenly becomes vain, and he's like, you know what, I don't like this aging thing, and I'm gonna, maybe I'll start dyeing my hair. I don't know, because he gets his first gray hair on.
I remember that.
Who knows what Richard? But I mean, my gosh, now it's interesting. Is be careful what you wish for. It's that scenario. I wonder how he would handle this notion that, well, I only have so many more years left, and who knows how many those are, and what will I do with the rest of my life, and how can I reconcile everything I've done? All those people for the supposed higher purpose, that maybe I'm not so sure about anymore. That what that purpose was specifically. If he starts to doubt what that purpose was, he has to now reconcile. Hey, you start with a genocide, everything that he committed.
Right, you could see him going to a dark place potentially.
There's no question, and wondering how he gets out of that might be interesting.
I was going to save this for the last question, but we put out a call to our listeners. What should we ask Nestor? And I think the best question, but an interesting one we got was if Disney decides to reboot the show someday, or would you go back and play a role in it? And it makes me think of that because your story is still out there.
I love that show.
Yeah.
I would love to play Richard again. And it all depends to me on it's all about the writing.
Right.
It's all and whether it's Damon or Carlton.
Right.
I know they've sworn.
And they've made it.
They made it very clear they're not going back to that. So if it were on the page and if it were remotely close to what they were able to capture, which is not an easy feat. What they did was so extraordinary.
Yeah.
But yeah, if the story is compelling and if the writing is somewhere there, I love that character. I would love to investigate what life would be like, post Lost.
Yeah. A couple of last questions. Were there any? And I'm not asking you to say anything negative about anyone you worked with. I wonder, were there any other actors on the show who you especially enjoyed sort of playing off of and seeing your characters interact?
Well, like I said, I didn't get to work with everyone. I didn't get to work with Ian per se, or Charlie, or Desmond, but so most of my work was with Ben, and then also with Locke, and working with Terry O'Quinn and Michael Emerson. It's just adding on to the gifts that I received and the blessings of the show, because not only are they obviously incredible talents, but they're really giving people and therefore giving actors. So they're great listeners. They're there in the scene with you, and it's very much going back to theater roots. It's like when you're sharing the space, and you're there for the purpose of connecting, and going moment to moment, and nobody does it better than those guys. And so that was a gift to get. Yes, look, it was an extraordinary cast across. Everyone was incredibly talented, but getting to work with these old theater guys, and guys. Terry had been around, has been doing film and TV for so long. It brought me back to that, and that was another blessing. And I treasure all those scenes. I remember having to do. There's one scene in particular with Terry, where it was the scene with the compass, where he brings me the compass, and we were.
This is one of the flashes, I think.
And it was a flash, yeah. And we're in Koaloa Ranch, which is this gorgeous ranch where they shot Jurassic Park. This incredible valley. It's like incredible volcanic rock, but now obviously all green, as all of Hawaii is, and then you're overlooking the ocean from this incredible valley, this gorgeous valley, and I remember thinking there, pinching myself, thinking, I'm doing this scene sitting here in this valley, looking at this ocean, next to with Terry O'Quinn, and thinking, I don't think it's going to get much better than this. And those were the gifts that we got, where we got this incredible material. We got to work with incredible actors like Terry, and we got to do it in this incredible setting, I've been blessed to get to work with so many phenomenal actors. But when you have all of those things coming together, I mean, it was hard to come back to. It was coming to reality.
Did you ever end up moving to Hawaii?
We did. So we moved there the last year. So
okay.
My wife and I, Shannon and I, put the boys in. They were in school there for a year. We wanted it to be longer, but at least we got a year there. And again, another gift. I mean, it kind of wrecked us. It was hard to come back after that.
Well, Ian Cusick never left, as I understand.
He didn't, and I completely understand. And believe me, don't think we didn't investigate the possibility of Hawaii 5-0. We're like, is there a chance in Hawaii 5-0? And we already have one lost actor.
I think the more lost actors they got, the more audience they would have had.
That was my argument. But anyway, no, that was. Come on, add that to the pile of gifts to get to work in Oahu and live there it was insane. It was beautiful.
Any other favorite memories from the set or from filming? Anything come to mind?
There's so many. I remember there are little things. There are little things that you go, oh my God, this is pretty amazing. Just throwing the football with Terry O'Quinn on the beach. Terry always brought it. It was the way he loosened up. He either had a knife that he threw against, that he threw against trees,
yes,
or it was a football. And I'm not very good at football, but Terry. I mean, I couldn't get my spiral down, but Terry was so patient with me, and he helped me on my spiral. But it was little things like that, or I remember even with Josh Holloway, he would bring out his guitar, and then he and Terry would sing, and I can't sing, I'm tone deaf. But listening to these guys, break out in the middle of the beach, singing songs, I mean, those memories to me, I remember even in the moment thinking, oh my God, this is so cool. How often do you get to do these things? So, Sunset on the Beach, getting to watch the premiere of the first episode of last season, with the fans, right there in Waikiki, in the open air. That's another memorable moment.
Everyone's brought that up.
I mean, there are moments like that. You're like, these things don't happen. They just don't happen. And just to get that gift and to be with the fans and watch that episode with the fans, there were like 10,000 people there. It was amazing.
It's incredible.
So it was. There's so many, rich moments. There was. I know there was the one funny moment that happened. I did mention this on Jimmy Kimmel, but for those who didn't watch,
that's okay.
I do remember. I did get a lot of, and I've had this my whole life. This whole notion about do I wear eyeliner and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And if you see my son's,
I got to tell you, I know the answer, but when we've put out the call to fans for question, that was the most popular question.
Well, listen, maybe let's address it now. Yeah. But I remember. I mean, I've dealt with that my whole life. As a kid, and. Not that was, anyone questioned whether I had eyeliner when I was 5, but I remember a lot of my mom's friends would say, oh my God, look at your eyelashes. I remember cutting them. I cut them because I had such a, I got so many comments as a kid, and my mom's like, don't cut, what are you doing? But it's so funny. So when it came around to social media, I wasn't on Twitter or anything like that. But I'd heard from people saying that, hey, they're calling you Maybelline man or, whatever it was. And I go, oh, that's pretty funny. I mean, I dealt with this my whole life, and I thought it's pretty hysterical. But watching the show, and I ended up doing The Dark Knight while I was doing Lost at the time. Right,
you were the mayor.
And the mayor in The Dark Knight. And I remember watching even The Dark Knight thinking, I mean, I can't argue with anyone. It looks that way. So, I mean, I don't blame anyone. Yeah, it does look that way. It's just sort of freakish looking. But I was when I was in Hawaii in Barnes & Noble, I remember my wife, I was with her, and this guy sort of tapped me on the shoulder, and he asked me, are those natural? And I look at him and I go, well, at first I thought, is he talking about my wife? And then I go, oh my God, no, yes, they are natural.
Yes.
So I remember that was like one moment when I was thinking, okay.
I think they wrote it into the show, as I recall. I think at one point Sawyer referred to you as the guy with the guy liner.
Yeah, it kind of ends up getting written in most shows I do. Pretty much I do. And again, I don't blame anybody for it because I can't argue with the final product. I think what we did, we started doing, I'm sure it's in the, it's in the behind the scenes on Lost. I think it's in one of the behind the scenes. Where Emily, our makeup artist, would sort of put base in between my eyelashes to break it up so it doesn't look so, so that became a way to, so it's not so distracting. But again, I cannot fault or blame anybody for it. It does look like that.
It's not a bad calling card to have as an actor, I guess.
All right. If nothing else, you at least you know.
At least you know the eyelashes stand out.
Yeah. Exactly.
Nestor, what are you working on now?
So right now I'm working on this show called The Morning Show with yet again with Carrie Aaron, with whom I did Bates Motel.
Right.
And we've wrapped our first season, so we'll launch. It's a series for Apple streaming.
Oh wow, okay.
So that
cutting edge right there.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting, and I'm really excited about it. I mean, Carrie Aaron is just another. One of the best writers that I've ever had to work with. She's extraordinary, and she's written an amazing show. So I'm just thrilled to be a part of it.
What's it about?
So it's basically the behind the scenes of a morning show, I guess of something like the Today Show, okay. And it's sort of specifically the first season. I can't say too much about it, but I think let's just say it's the behind the scenes show of the Today Show, and it's grounded in something very relevant.
Okay.
The first season is.
Well, I'm all in favor of more shows about journalists.
Well, then you will surely be represented. Yeah. I represent a weatherman, so it's a journalist of sorts, but it's a great cast. You have Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon and Steve Carell and Mark Duplass, Billy Crudup. But it's a big cast and a great cast, and so no, I'm thrilled to be a part of it. And we'll start season 2 shooting it fairly soon.
Well, so when does it air?
It'll air the first season. I believe it's not been announced yet, but I believe it'll be somewhere this fall.
Okay, great. I should note before I turn off the mic here, I noticed a couple minutes ago you've got Jack Bender's artwork, his book sitting on the table here.
This wasn't a plant. Yes, it is. That's right. It's Bender's art book. Yeah. Oh, he's a great artist.
I think that we talked to him a couple of years ago, and I think he was working on this at the time, and he told me about it. I meant to get a copy.
Well, now you can go through it. It's pretty amazing. No, I love Bender. One thing I'll say about that finale is that I remember reading it thinking, this is extraordinary, this finale. They're thinking, how is Bender going to execute this?
That's interesting.
Especially that the scenes with Josh Holloway and Elizabeth Mitchell, I was thinking, how is he going to pull that off? And I know
scenes where they Juliet and Sawyer reconnect.
When they reconnect, and I think he grabs her. She's going to fall into remind me. She's going to fall into some hole or.
Oh, this is the season 5 finale. Yeah, the incident. That's my favorite episode of the show, by the way. Yes. Yeah, where she has to detonate the bomb at the bottom of the.
Yes, I'm sorry. It was that particular episode. It wasn't the finale. Although he did the finale as well, which was extraordinary. But he always did the season finales. But that season finale, when he did that, when he had to detonate that, I was thinking, how is he going to pull this off? And some of it was CGI, and it was more about the emotional content, not necessarily the physical feat of it. And he was an actor himself, but he's an artist, and nuances, emotional nuances. I mean, he's as good as it gets.
Nestor, thank you very much
for
talking to us for The Hatch.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much. It's just, for me, this is a gift because I get to relive probably one of the better creative moments and experiences of my life.
I probably, when we started this podcast, was in the camp of adamantly opposed to any kind of Lost reboot or spin-off ever. But now you have proposed the idea of sort of a series focused on the others and their society and conflicts within it. And now here Nestor brings up this idea of, wouldn't it be fun to sort of play out Richard's story and maybe Desmond's involved somehow? And I would watch the hell out of that, man, I've got to admit. That sounds great.
Yeah, I would too. I think I've had kind of the same transformation revisiting the show and just realizing how much untapped potential there is.
Yeah.
I don't know, even watching this episode again, I know we've talked about this a bit the last couple of weeks, but I kept thinking how cool it would be to have a show about the others. when Ben is writing in that journal that I mentioned, you can look it up on Lostpedia and see the text of that journal, which of course people took screenshots of. And there's a reference, and I actually read that Michael Emerson wrote it, but got it approved by the producers. There's a reference to the others' bylaws in there.
Incredible.
Like, I want to know about the others' bylaws.
I need to know everything that's in those bylaws.
Get me a copy of that.
Oh, jeez.
And there's this other great line, which, again, everyone should just go to the Ben's Diary Lostpedia page. But the best part, he writes, "Feeling older than my years today, I can't remember the last time I was able to indulge myself with a day of reading or walking. There was a time when the management of our affairs here seemed so straightforward." Which...
That's absolutely outstanding. Oh, I can't wait to go read that.
We got to watch the show about the others is what we need. And I was surprised that Nestor so readily said he'd be willing to go play that character again. Like, great, sign him up.
Yeah, a few years ago I would have said something different, but I think now I would say, yeah, I'd watch it.
Anyway, thanks very much to Nestor, and thanks again to everyone who's talked with us this year. We've had some really phenomenal guests. We've been really, to use Nestor's term, we've been really blessed the last couple of years to have these great people from the show, from Jack Benward and onward, come on to talk to us. Looking forward to continuing to do it for the next 3 years, and we just we love having these conversations. They're the most fun. So thank you, Nestor.
Absolutely, thank you. So to wrap up season 3, do you have a nomination for most valuable cast member, most valuable player?
I do. I'm going to nominate Jack.
Okay.
I just I looked over the course of the season and I thought his plan at the beginning of the year to agree to do the surgery and then put Ben's life on the line on the operating table to get Kate and Sawyer out was a really smart plan and a daring move. I think that even though his motivations weren't pure with Juliet, as we see this week, that he ultimately was right to trust her and that she became an asset.
Yeah. And ultimately, I've got to say, was probably right to keep it, to keep the information close, put the rest of the group on an information diet, as they say. And
information diet. Absolutely. And in the end, his plan in the finale is a good one. And as we've discussed, he's willing to, make some hard choices for the good of the group.
Yeah.
And I just think that, I know I spent a lot of the first 2 seasons criticizing Jack's leadership, and I think he brings it home in season 3 and to me deserves that MVP.
Yeah, it seems like he does really come into his own in that role in this season. And he sort of, when he snaps in Greatest Hits, which we talked about, people keep asking, for 90 days I've been asked to make decisions for this camp. I just made one. Like, there's this little bit of snap to attention that I think the viewer does when we say, like, oh, okay, Jack is owning this position now, rather than sort of falling to it reluctantly or because no one else will or because he's the person who happens to be saving people. But, at this point, like you said, he makes hard choices, and he, I think, has come into his own and gotten a lot more comfortable with thinking about sort of the greater good of the group rather than saving, this is a long way from the man who was sort of going to sacrifice all kinds of stuff to save Boone's life.
Who is your nominee for LVP of season 3 of Lost?
So how do we feel about John Locke here? A man who starts the season in a sweat lodge. Let's not forget that was Locke's first episode of the season.
Thank you for reminding me. I managed to forget, but
not a problem.
Nope.
Is deeply conflicted, decides early in the season that he sort of really doesn't care about the group and is going to go off and try to find some answers on his own. And I think you could argue that he spends most of the season just kind of chasing red herrings and ghosts. He buys Ben as this grand leader until he finds out that he's an emperor with no clothes, and he can't kill his father, which, is probably not like a bad thing, but he makes this other, he makes Sawyer do this for him, and in the end he knifes someone in the back and says we're not supposed to
blows
leave.
up the sub.
He blows up the sub. He consciously tries to, in blowing up the sub, he does actively keep people from leaving the island, presumably, assuming they were actually going to get off. And I don't know, he is very much just like a chaos agent in this season, who is in search of something and doesn't quite know what.
I mean, I agree and I disagree. I think that he has a strong case for LVP. I think that he knows by the end of the season what he's in search of. He's in search of nobody gets to leave this damn island because...
But why?
Because question mark.
Right.
I mean, because taller Ghost Walt told him that. I don't know, man. I mean...
Do you have any other ideas?
I think the saddest thing is that once again, as it has been, his whole life and his whole time on the island, Locke is being manipulated by forces that he doesn't understand.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe he sees through Ben now, but does he know where that apparition of Walt came from? I mean, no, it's probably the Man in Black. I don't want to try to explain
Walt
that.
To be dead. Let's not go down that path right now.
I don't know that it would require him to... Oh, yeah, you're right.
Because the Man in Black animates dead bodies.
He does animate dead bodies. That's a very good point. Moral of the story is that Locke does not understand, and neither do we, this mysterious force that is telling him to do these things, and yet he does them and carries them out with, violent efficiency.
Yeah. And increasingly
I think
violent efficiency and increasing devotion to the cause, despite understanding maybe less than ever.
For sure. I mean, certainly the trip to Jacob's cabin didn't resolve anything. It made it only more confusing.
Yeah.
So, I think I'd got to be with you on Locke as LVP there. The other nomination that I'll throw out, which is a little more of a dark horse, is I'll throw out Eloise Hawking as LVP.
Oh, okay.
Just on the argument being that the whole... as an agent of course correcting for the universe, forcing Desmond to go to the island and not be with Penny, and
basically forcing Desmond into years of exile. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we've also got the course correcting idea of Jack wasn't supposed to leave the island and Charlie has to die, and I mean, no, Eloise isn't directly responsible for all that stuff, but she represents this idea of fates that can't be avoided even when they're bad fates, or things that people don't want. And the way we see her step in so forcefully with Desmond and convince him to do something that's not really what he wants, and that's apparently how fate is supposed to operate when it doesn't get its way, I think is quite upsetting, as we talked about during Flashes Before Your Eyes. So that makes her my nominee.
That's interesting. And Desmond almost seems to start transmitting that idea in the way he communicates with Charlie, no matter what happens, you're going to die. And that's what we see play out in this episode when, as we talked about, Charlie potentially could have survived that grenade going off, and Desmond could have survived too, but he chooses because he thinks he's bound to fate or whatever. I wonder if Desmond unwittingly became an agent of course correcting himself.
Ugh, but I don't want to make Desmond the LVP.
Desmond could not in the same way that Saeed is like a perennial MVP nomination, and we can't give it to him every season.
That's true. We kind of for our listeners, we kind of went over this beforehand briefly and sort of just agreed that we couldn't both just name Saeed the MVP again. We had to do something different.
Who did we name last season?
Saeed.
Surely it was Saeed.
It must have been, but let's maybe by season 4 or 5, maybe it's like Oscar voting. You don't want to give it to the same person every year, but in a couple seasons we can circle back and give Saeed another MVP.
Oh boy. Okay, well, Jack and John.
Jack and John. Wow, if you had told me at the start of the show that I would be voting for John Locke for LVP and Jack Shephard for MVP, I would have thought that you'd gotten it backwards.
Man, I haven't done a total 180 on John Locke, but I've definitely done a 120 degree. I remembered him as this sort of giant of the island, and now it's just man, he's a confused man.
He's a sad old man.
Doesn't really know what he's doing, and fascinating. Anyway.
It is. And Jack, for all of his faults, exhibits some real strong leadership qualities, especially compared to John.
Yes. Wow, what a season.
Have plenty more time to discuss Jack and John in the ensuing seasons. They come to a quite fierce confrontation, as you may recall, at the beginning of season 4, which is where we're going next. Thank you for being with us on The Hatch these first 3 seasons. We so much appreciate your listening and can't wait to keep doing this.
It has been an honor and a pleasure. We are going to take a few months off to reboot, to set up some interviews for season 4 and beyond, to just take some time off. But we are already, I think I speak for both of us when I say we are already thrilled to get into some of what we get to get into in season 4.
We are. We get the Freighter, we get Daniel Faraday and Charlotte and Frank Lapidus and Miles and a whole wonderful bunch of new characters, and it's going to be great. In the meantime, find us on social media. We are on Facebook, facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast. Twitter, as we've mentioned a couple times, at The Hatch Podcast.
It's going to be a few months, but if in the interim you'd like to leave us a hot take for the early part of season 4, the number where you can do that is +1 9546 Dharma.
You can also leave us a voice message through Facebook as well, through the Facebook Messenger tool. Let us know what you think of season 4 whenever you want, and we'll get around to it.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth.
And I am Sammy Roth.
I'm Rosie Murphy.
And we are The Hatch Podcast, and we will be back for season 4.
Namaste.